I want to talk about the importance of establishing clear retirement income objectives if we're going to get a more coherent approach to reform. It's worth in understanding why it's so important to go back and see where the system came from, a bit of history, and to understand how different that history might have been if the objectives had been much more clearly articulated from the very beginning and guided policy ever since. The history of retirement incomes policy actually starts before federation. The two largest states, Victoria and New South Wales, had age pension systems from the year 1900, before federation. Queensland also introduced an age pension in 1908, at which time the Commonwealth, which had the constitutional power, decided that a national uniform age pension would be a better bet, and it so legislated for an age pension effective from the 1st of July 2009. The Commonwealth age pension, which was subject to a residency requirement, which I think started about 25 years residency in Australia but was later eased, it was set at the modest level even then of £1 per fortnight per person as a maximum rate, which, doing a quick calculation for inflation and the like, is something like a bit under $4,000 per annum per person in today's dollars, something like that. And it was means tested from the start. So clearly, whatever was said at the time, which I didn't have time to dig out, it was seen as a safety net to ensure that people would not fall into poverty after retirement. The age pension has retained that character ever since, although the form and parameters of the means test, or a combination of income and assets test, has changed quite a number of times and are currently proposed to change again, as we heard from Cassandra. The way the pension is adjusted has also changed a number of times. Initially, adjustments were made at the government's discretion periodically. A form of indexation was first introduced in the 1930s, but then was abandoned as war approached. In the post-war period, of course, indexation has become the norm, and in recent times it's been based on average wage movements, implying that poverty, and thus what income is needed to avoid it, is seen as relative to general community standards. And again, that was a point made by Cassandra. There has been a far more confused history in superannuation policy development. A number of attempts were made in the past to establish something like Andrews or the World Bank's Pillar 1, that is a mandatory national superannuation scheme, although what was being talked about was not always called that. Attempts of that sort were made as early as the 1920s and 30s, but they all elapsed or were never implemented. The first attempt that on my reading of the history, that was made to develop a national superannuation scheme of some sort was proposed by the National Superannuation Committee of Inquiry, set up by the Whitlam government in the 1970s, chaired by Keith Hancock. It recommended a partially contributory universal pension system with an earnings-related supplement, something like we have now with the combination of the age pension and super. So what that committee was proposing was a system that for the first time looked in an integrated way at both components, with a safety net but also an element of income maintenance post-retirement. Whatever its merits, though, Hancock's recommendations were rejected by the subsequent Fraser government. It wasn't until the early 1990s that a scheme was introduced with income maintenance as an implied but not very clearly articulated objective, a scheme to apply to the bulk of the workforce, namely the superannuation guarantee scheme we still have. It was, of course, preceded by the achievement of an initial element of occupational superannuation achieved through the centralised wage fixing system, funded by employer contributions of 3%. of wages and extended award by award throughout the workforce, or through much of the workforce. Of course, in some sectors, the public service, banking and insurance, large companies generally, occupational super schemes had long existed, at least for white-collar or salaried staff. Although it is hard to find a clear expression of how it would serve to achieve an overall retirement income objective, the key driver of the superannuation guarantee reform was very obviously a desire on the part of the labour movement to lift living standards in retirement beyond what the age pension would provide. And to make sure that that was a general factor for the bulk of the workforce, not just the privileged, 40% or thereabouts who had already had occupational superannuation. Along with that expected achievement, a number of other potential achievements of the superannuation guarantee system were also ascribed to it, including lifting national saving. I have a bit of form in that direction, and relieving demography-related and other pressures on future budgets and associated intergenerational equity concern. I hasten to say that I believe that a compulsory superannuation system such as ours, that is contributory and fully funded from the contributions, albeit assisted by significant, if often exaggerated, tax concessions, albeit inequitably distributed, and which operates in conjunction with the age pension system, is in many ways an excellent system. And we, in my opinion, not going to do ourselves a favour by going back to TORS and tearing it all up. When fully mature, this system will, for most people in the workforce, produce something like a first world level of income maintenance in retirement. I personally think that the proposed increase to 12% would have assured that for most middle income earners, and I disagree with Andrew on that. It depends which modelling you look at, and credible modelling on credible assumptions that I look at think that the 9.5% probably isn't enough for that middle income group. Of course, very different considerations apply to those on very high incomes who don't need to have their level of income maintenance at the levels that middle income earners do, and people on low incomes have very different issues. Along the way up to the present, changes to the superannuation and age pension policies have tended to be made separately and generally without adequate consideration of their interactions. Short-term budgetary considerations have been a major driver, and changes have hardly ever been made in pursuit of a clearly articulated retirement income objective, or to have been designed in full conformity with general policy principles such as simplicity, fairness and efficiency. Had that approach, some of the suboptimal decisions, particularly on the superannuation tax structure, might have been avoided. How much of the complexity of the system, the too frequent changes of the rules and the inequitable distribution of the benefit of tax concessions could have been avoided if the recognised best tax structure, taxing entirely on withdrawal from the fund at the end, or the similar in orientation, very good proposal of the Henry Report had not been trumped by short-term budgetary considerations. We would have a far simpler and fairer system without the need for as many rules and without the need for the so frequent changes to the tax structure and other rules that we've seen. Importantly, more revenue capacity would have been left to future budgets that will bear the higher costs of providing age pensions, health and aged care to the population, to a population with substantially more old people. So the first moral of this story is that narrowly focused reviews and piecemeal budget-driven decisions on the separate components of the retirement income system, conducted without the guidance of a clear overriding objective for each of those components, have left us with a system of many faults along with its undoubted strengths. The second moral is that future policy development will be more consistent and effective if it is guided by a clear and widely accepted objective. and an approach that deals with the overall retirement system in all its components holistically. Thank you.